The first thing I noticed was the silence. My grandfather's cattle usually gathered near the eastern pasture before sunrise, pushing their noses through the old wire fence while they waited for me to bring hay. That morning, they stood nearly 50 yards back, restless and confused, as if something beyond the ridge had frightened them. I pulled my jacket tighter and crossed the field with my coffee still warming one hand. The farm had belonged to my family for 87 years. 212 acres of rolling Kentucky pasture, narrow creeks, tobacco barns, and stubborn red clay that clung to your boots after a hard rain. My grandfather, Samuel Hart, used to say the land remembered everyone who cared for it. At 39, I was the fourth generation of Harts to wake before daylight and walk those fields. I had never expected to inherit the farm alone. My father died when I was 26. My mother moved to Louisville a few years later, unable to live in a house where every room reminded her of him. That left my grandfather and me. For 12 years, we ran the place together. He taught me how to repair a fence without wasting wire, how to recognize rain by the smell of the wind, and how to tell when someone was lying about land. Folks get strange when dirt has their name attached to it, he once told me. They start believing wanting something is the same as owning it. At the time, I thought he was talking about a disagreement with the county over a drainage ditch. 3 years after his death, I finally understood what he meant. The eastern pasture sloped toward a line of cedar trees separating my farm from Wade Mercer's property. Wade had bought the neighboring farm 18 months earlier. He was a real estate developer from Lexington who wore polished boots, drove a black pickup that never seemed to get muddy, and called every piece of land an opportunity. Our first conversation had happened beside my mailbox. He had leaned against his truck and looked across my fields as though he were mentally dividing them into lots. "That eastern section doesn't do much for you," he said. "It feeds 30 head of cattle." He smiled. I meant financially. That told me almost everything I needed to know about him. Wade had already purchased 3 struggling farms in the county. He cleared trees, leveled fields, and resold the land to people who wanted large houses and decorative barns, but had no intention of farming. Twice, he offered to buy 20 acres from me. Twice, I refused. The third time, he sent a formal offer through an attorney. I mailed it back unsigned. After that, Wade stopped being friendly. Standing in the pasture that cold October morning, I saw why the cattle had refused to approach the ridge. The fence was gone. Not broken, not damaged. Gone. The rusted wire my grandfather and I had repaired countless times had been removed, along with the weathered oak posts that had marked the property line for as long as I could remember. A new fence stood farther inside my land. Much farther. Fresh wooden posts cut across the pasture in a straight, deliberate line. Bright metal wire stretched between them, still shining with morning dew. I set my coffee on the ground. For several seconds, I simply stared. Then I started walking. I counted my steps from the old stone marker near the creek to the new fence. I knew that pasture better than I knew most rooms in my house. I knew where the ground dipped, where the clover grew thickest, and where my grandfather had buried an old water line. By the time I reached the new boundary, my coffee had stopped steaming behind me. Wade had taken nearly 5 acres. The land he had fenced off included the creek access, 2 large walnut trees, and the only level path wide enough to move cattle between the eastern and southern pastures. This was not a surveying mistake. Someone had planned it. Heavy equipment tracks ran across the grass. Near one of the posts, I found a strip of orange survey ribbon tied in a tight knot. I took out my phone and photographed everything. Then I called Wade. He answered on the 4th ring. "Morning, Nora." His voice was calm. Too calm. "You moved the eastern fence." "I replaced an inaccurate boundary. You put it on my property." A short silence followed. Not surprise, not confusion, calculation. "That depends on which records you're looking at," he said. "I'm looking at the field my family has owned since 1937. Family stories aren't legal descriptions." My fingers tightened around the phone. "What exactly are you claiming?" "According to the county map, the creek is the natural boundary. The old fence was placed incorrectly. The creek bends." "Yes, and your new fence cuts straight across the bend. That's how the surveyor interpreted it." "Which surveyor?" Another pause. "You'll receive the documents." I looked across the fence at Wade's property. His black truck sat beside a newly built equipment shed less than half a mile away. He was close enough to see me. He had probably been watching the entire conversation. "Take the fence down," I said. Nora, I understand you're emotional. That word did something to me. Not because it hurt, because it clarified who I was dealing with. I'm not emotional, Wade. You sound upset. You stole 5 acres from me. I corrected a boundary discrepancy. You did it without notifying me. I notified the county. You didn't notify the owner. He sighed as though I were a difficult employee he regretted hiring. Look, I'm willing to discuss compensation for the inconvenience, but I'm not moving a legally surveyed fence because you have sentimental memories attached to the old one. I looked at the 2 walnut trees on the other side of his new boundary. My grandfather had planted them when my father was born. Wade knew that. I had told him during our first walk along the property line. This isn't finished, I said. I imagine your attorney will explain it better. Then he hung up. That afternoon, a certified envelope arrived. Inside was a copy of a survey stamped by a company I had never heard of. The document claimed Wade's property extended west across the creek bend, swallowing 8 acres of my pasture. Attached to it was a letter from his attorney instructing me not to remove, damage, or cross the new fence. I read the letter twice at my kitchen table. Then I carried it into my grandfather's study. The room had remained almost untouched since he died. His denim jacket still hung behind the door. His old reading glasses rested beside a stack of seed catalogs. Dust covered the top of the wooden filing cabinet where he kept tax records, cattle receipts, and handwritten notes dating back decades. I opened the first drawer. Nothing. The second held insurance papers and machinery manuals. The bottom drawer was locked. I had forgotten about it. For years, the small brass key had hung on my grandfather's watch chain. After the funeral, I placed the chain inside a cigar box in his dresser because I couldn't bring myself to separate the objects. The key turned with a quiet click. Inside the drawer were 3 rolled maps tied with faded blue ribbon. Beneath them sat a sealed envelope. My name was written across the front in my grandfather's uneven handwriting. Nora, if anyone ever challenges the Eastern line, open this first. For the first time that day, my hands began to shake. I sat in his chair and broke the seal. Inside was a letter, an old photograph, and a survey dated May 14, 1968. The survey carried the county seal. It also showed something Wade's new documents did not. The creek had never been the legal boundary. And according to my grandfather's handwritten note at the bottom of the page, Wade had not stolen 5 acres. He had exposed a secret about his own property that had been buried for more than 50 years. I barely slept that night. The old survey stayed on the kitchen table beneath the yellow light over the sink, weighted at each corner with coffee mugs so the paper wouldn't curl back into itself. I read every line until the words stopped looking like words. Survey completed May 14, 1968. Prepared for Samuel Hart and Edwin Mercer. Edwin Mercer, Wade's grandfather. That was the first detail that made me sit straighter. The second was a narrow strip of land marked along the eastern side of the creek. It ran almost the entire length of Wade's property, from the county road to a limestone ridge near the southern pasture. The handwritten label beside it said, Hart Access Easement, permanent and non-transferable. I knew what an easement was. It meant my family had the legal right to use land belonging to someone else for a specific purpose. But the map showed more than an access route. A dotted line extended from my pasture through Wade's land to an old spring house I had not seen since childhood. Beside the line, my grandfather had written, Water rights retained by Hart family. Original deed in county archive. Wade had not just moved a fence onto my property, he had placed it directly across an easement my family had held for more than 50 years. And if the survey was accurate, the spring supplying water to part of his farm had never belonged entirely to the Mercer property. I looked at the photograph that had been inside the envelope. 2 young men stood beside a wooden survey marker, both wearing rolled sleeves and dirt-stained jeans. My grandfather was easy to recognize, even at 28. He had the same serious eyes I remembered from childhood. The man beside him had to be Edwin Mercer. They were smiling, not the stiff kind of smile people wear for official photographs. They looked like friends. On the back, my grandfather had written, Sam and Eddie at the East marker. The agreement kept both farms alive. That sentence bothered me more than anything else, because Wade had acted as though our families had always disputed the line. The photograph suggested the opposite. By 7 the next morning, I was driving toward the county courthouse with the survey protected inside a cardboard tube on the passenger seat. Hartwell County's records office occupied the first floor of a red brick building that had once served as a bank. The front steps were worn smooth in the center, and the brass handles on the doors had dulled from decades of use. My grandfather used to bring me there when he paid property taxes. As a child, I thought the courthouse smelled like old books and wet coats. It still did. A woman named Linda Avery sat behind the records counter. She had silver hair, red-framed glasses, and the patient expression of someone who had spent 30 years explaining government forms to people already irritated before they arrived. "I need to see the original deed records for 2 adjoining farms," I said. She glanced at the cardboard tube. "Boundary trouble?" "That obvious." "Honey, nobody carries a survey in here because they're having a peaceful week." I gave her the parcel numbers for my farm in Wades. She typed slowly, pausing every few seconds to read the screen. "Your property is clean," she said. "Current deed transferred from Samuel Hart to Nora Hart through probate 3 years ago." "And the Mercer property?" She scrolled farther. "Sold to Wade Mercer 18 months ago. Before that, it belonged to a holding company." "What holding company?" "Blue Cedar Agricultural Holdings." I had never heard the name. "Who owned it before them?" Linda frowned. "The Mercer family, originally. Then it looks like there was a tax-related transfer about 12 years ago." "Can I see the older deeds?" She pushed her glasses higher. "That may take a while." "I have time." She studied me for a moment, then disappeared through a door behind the counter. While I waited, I unfolded Wade's survey on a long wooden table. His map looked precise, clean, modern. That was what made it convincing. Straight lines, computer-generated labels, a raised seal. My grandfather's survey looked older because it was older. The paper had yellowed and the boundaries had been drawn by hand. But age did not make it less legal. It only made it easier to ignore. Linda returned carrying 2 thick record books and a narrow gray box. "The deed books are digitized after 1985, she said. "Anything older is still stored manually." She placed the first book in front of me. "Be gentle. This one's older than both of us combined." The pages were heavy and smelled faintly of dust and glue. Linda helped me find the Mercer transfer from 1968. The deed referenced the same survey in my grandfather's drawer. It also mentioned the easement. I read the paragraph 3 times. "A permanent agricultural and water access easement shall remain with the Hart property, its heirs, and lawful successors, regardless of any future sale or transfer of the eastern parcel." "Why isn't this on the current county map?" I asked. Linda leaned over my shoulder. "It should be, but it isn't. No." She walked back to her computer and entered another search. A crease appeared between her eyebrows. "That's strange." "What?" "The legal description changed when the Mercer property transferred to Blue Cedar." "Changed how?" "The easement reference disappeared." I stared at her. "Can that happen?" "Not legally, not without a release." "Was there one?" She searched again. "No release is recorded." The room seemed to grow quieter. Could someone simply leave it out? Someone could make a mistake. The same mistake that shifted my boundary almost 5 acres? Linda did not answer immediately. Government employees learn to become careful with words. I could see caution settle into her expression before she spoke. "I can tell you what is recorded," she said. "I can't tell you why." "Then tell me everything that's recorded." She opened the gray box. Inside were index cards organized alphabetically by hand. "This was the old cross-reference system," she said. "Sometimes annotations never made it into the digital database. We searched under Hart. Nothing. Then Mercer. 3 cards. The first referenced the 1968 survey. The second referenced the permanent easement. The third contained only a handwritten note. Boundary amendment submitted. Rejected, June 1974. "Who submitted it?" I asked. Linda checked the original record book. Her finger stopped halfway down the page. "Edwin Mercer." The smiling man in the photograph. The friend who had stood beside my grandfather at the eastern marker. What was he trying to change? Linda read silently for several seconds. He claimed the creek should replace the surveyed boundary. The exact argument Wade had made to me. And the county rejected it? Yes. The county engineer noted that the creek was seasonal and subject to movement. The fixed stone markers remained the controlling boundary. Stone markers? According to this, there were 4. I remembered the old stone near the creek where I had started counting my steps. 1 marker, I had no idea where the other 3 were. Could those markers prove the original line? If they still exist. My phone buzzed against the table. Wade. I let it ring. A voicemail notification appeared a few seconds later. Linda glanced at the screen but said nothing. Can you certify copies of these records? I asked. Yes. I need all of them. While she prepared the copies, I listened to Wade's message. Nora, I heard you've been asking questions at the courthouse. I'd prefer we handle this privately before it becomes unnecessarily expensive for both of us. Call me. He had heard. Not later that afternoon. Not the following day. Immediately. Someone inside the courthouse had contacted him, or someone had been watching for my name. I looked toward the counter. Linda was stamping each page, unaware of the message. When she returned, I asked a question I had not planned to ask. Who requested copies of these same records most recently? She hesitated. Public records requests are logged. Can I see the log? She turned back to the computer. The printer hummed beside her. A single page came out. She slid it toward me. The most recent request had been submitted 9 months earlier. The name listed was not Wade Mercer. It was Blue Cedar Agricultural Holdings, the same company that had temporarily owned his farm. The request included every document I had just found. The old survey, the rejected boundary amendment, the Hart easement. They had known. Long before Wade moved the fence, someone connected to his property had already discovered that his legal claim was false. I left the courthouse carrying certified copies and the uncomfortable certainty that the fence was only the beginning. Wade was waiting beside my truck. He wore a navy jacket over a pressed white shirt, dressed more like a man headed to a business meeting than someone standing outside a rural courthouse at 9 a.m. You move fast, he said. So do you. His smile did not reach his eyes. I thought we could save ourselves some trouble. You mean save you some trouble? Nora, property records in this county are a mess. Half these descriptions were written before anyone had reliable equipment. My survey was prepared by the county. 58 years ago. And your grandfather tried to change it 6 years later. The smile disappeared, only for a second, but I saw it. You've been digging, he said. You built a fence on my farm. I built it on the boundary recognized by my surveyor. Did your surveyor see the 1968 map? Wade looked toward the courthouse doors. That was answer enough. You know about the easement, I said. I know there are old documents that may or may not still apply. It says permanent. Nothing is permanent in real estate. My grandfather believed promises were. Your grandfather was a farmer. So am I. I didn't mean that as an insult. You usually don't. That's what makes it convenient. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. I'll make you an offer. A generous one. More than those 5 acres are worth. They aren't for sale. Everything has a number. No, everything has a cost. That's different. His jaw tightened. I had finally found the point where his calm ended. This doesn't need to become personal, he said. You moved a fence while I was asleep. I corrected a legal description. You knew the county rejected that same description in 1974. For the first time since I had known him, Wade looked uncertain. It passed quickly, but it was there. Then he glanced at the cardboard tube beneath my arm. What exactly did Samuel leave you? I said nothing. His eyes stayed on the tube. That was when I understood what he was truly afraid of. Not the survey I had shown the clerk. Something else. Something he believed my grandfather might have preserved. I'll see you around, Nora, he said. He walked away before I could answer. That afternoon, I returned to the eastern pasture with my grandfather's map, a shovel, and a measuring wheel borrowed from a friend. The first stone marker stood where it always had, half buried beside the creek. Using the distances from the survey, I followed the old boundary south. The second marker took 40 minutes to find beneath a thorn bush. The third was buried under soil near the walnut trees, exactly 12 feet beyond Wade's new fence. Each discovery strengthened my case. But according to the map, the fourth and most important marker stood near the old spring house on Wade's side, the marker where my grandfather and Edwin Mercer had posed for the photograph. Reaching it would mean crossing the new fence and entering land Wade claimed as his own. I was folding the map when I noticed a note written in much smaller letters along the lower edge. I had missed it the night before. The ink was faded, but still readable. If the fourth marker is ever disturbed, check beneath the foundation stone. Eddie signed the original agreement twice. I looked across Wade's property toward the distant roof of the abandoned spring house. My grandfather had not merely saved a survey. He had hidden something there, and judging by Wade's reaction outside the courthouse, he already suspected it existed. I waited until the next morning before going anywhere near the spring house. That was not because I was afraid of Wade. At least, that was what I told myself. The truth was, I had spent most of the night imagining every possible way he could twist the situation against me. Trespassing, property damage, harassment. By sunrise, I understood that finding the hidden agreement would mean nothing if Wade convinced a judge I had obtained it illegally. So I called an attorney. Her name was Rachel Bennett, and she had handled agricultural property disputes in 3 surrounding counties. When I explained what had happened, she interrupted only twice. Once when I mentioned the missing easement, and once when I told her about my grandfather's note. "Do not cross that fence," she said. "I thought you might say that. Photograph the markers from your side. Send me every document you found. I'll request access to inspect the spring house." "How long will that take?" "That depends on how cooperative your neighbor is." "He won't be. Then it depends on how quickly I can make cooperation his least expensive option." There was something reassuring about the way she said it. Not dramatic, not angry, just certain. I spent the rest of the morning photographing the property line. Each stone marker, each section of new fence, every tire track left by the equipment Wade had used. Near the walnut trees, I found something I had missed before. One of the new fence posts had been driven directly beside the 3rd stone marker, not near it, beside it. The post leaned slightly because the buried stone had prevented the machine from going deeper. Wade's crew had found the marker. They simply built over it. I took 6 photographs from different angles. Then I noticed a man standing on the other side of the fence. He was older, maybe 65, wearing a faded green cap and a brown work coat. I recognized him as Earl Pritchard, a retired cattle farmer who occasionally did equipment work for neighboring properties. He looked at the post, then at me. "Morning, Nora." "Morning." Neither of us said anything for a moment. "Did you help install this fence?" I asked. Earl rubbed one hand over his jaw. "I drove the post machine." "Did you see that stone?" His eyes shifted toward Wade's equipment shed. "Yes." "What did Wade tell you it was?" "He said it was debris." "Debris with a survey cross carved into the top?" Earl lowered his voice. "I told him it looked like a boundary marker. And he told me the new survey took priority." "Did he ask you to remove it?" "No, machine couldn't lift it. So he said to put the post beside it and keep moving." I looked at the marker again. "Would you be willing to say that in writing?" Earl stepped back. "I don't want trouble." "Neither did I." "He gives me work. He took land that doesn't belong to him." Earl stared across the pasture. "I've known your family a long time." "Then you know my grandfather didn't make careless agreements." "I know, but Wade owns half the contracts around here. Clearing jobs, hauling, grading. A man can lose a lot without anybody ever threatening him directly." That told me more about Wade than any courthouse record had. He did not need to shout. He just made people afraid of what might happen if they said no. "I'm not asking you to choose sides," I said. "I'm asking you to tell the truth." Earl gave a tired laugh. "Those are usually the same thing." He walked back toward his truck without agreeing, but he did not say no. By noon, Rachel called. "I sent Wade a formal preservation notice," she said. "What does that mean?" "It means he is now legally warned not to remove, damage, alter, or conceal any markers, records, structures, or materials related to the disputed boundary. And the spring house? I requested a joint inspection for Friday morning. That soon? He responded in 12 minutes. I leaned against the kitchen counter. What did he say? No. That sounds like him. He also claimed the spring house is structurally unsafe. It has been standing for at least 100 years. Conveniently, he says it became dangerous this week. I closed my eyes. He's going to destroy it. He would be very foolish to do that after receiving notice. Rachel, you don't understand. He thought I would never find the old survey. Now he knows I'm looking for something inside that building. I understand perfectly. That's why I filed an emergency motion this morning. I looked through the window toward the eastern ridge. What happens now? A judge decides whether we can inspect. And until then, you watch from your side of the fence. You document everything. You do not confront him alone. That last part stayed with me. Not because I thought Wade would hurt me, because I realized Rachel believed desperation had already changed the situation. At 3 that afternoon, a white utility truck drove onto Wade's property. It stopped near the spring house. 2 men got out. One carried a red can. I grabbed my phone and ran outside. From the top of my pasture, I could see them moving equipment through the weeds. Wade's black truck was parked nearby. I called Rachel. "There are men at the spring house. Can you see what they're doing?" "One has a fuel can." "Record everything. I'm calling the sheriff." I started filming. The men cleared brush around the foundation. One carried a chainsaw. The other began stacking old boards beside the building. Then Wade appeared. Even from a distance, I could tell he was looking directly at me. He raised one hand. Not a greeting, a warning. I kept recording. 10 minutes later, a sheriff's cruiser came down the county road and turned onto Wade's driveway. Deputy James Holloway stepped out. I had gone to school with his younger sister. He knew exactly who I was and exactly what the Hart farm meant to my family. Wade met him halfway between the driveway and the spring house. They spoke for several minutes. Then Wade pointed toward me. Deputy Holloway crossed the field but stopped at the new fence. "Miss Hart." "Deputy, Mr. Mercer says you've been filming his employees. They're standing beside a structure that may contain evidence in an active boundary dispute. He says they're clearing hazardous material. With gasoline?" Deputy Holloway looked over his shoulder. "He says they were planning to burn the brush. Beside a wooden spring house?" He sighed. "I've told him no burning until this is settled." "Did you see the preservation notice?" "I did." "Then you know he isn't supposed to alter anything." "I'm not here to decide the property case." "I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to prevent him from destroying evidence." The deputy studied me. Then he looked down and noticed the third stone marker beside Wade's fence post. He crouched. "Is that one of the original monuments?" "Yes." He photographed it with his phone. "Stay on your side," he said. "I'll make sure they leave." Within 20 minutes, the utility truck was gone. Wade remained. He walked to the fence after the deputy drove away. "You called the sheriff on me," he said. "You brought fuel to the spring house." "To burn brush. After telling my attorney the structure was unsafe." "It is." "Then why were your workers standing beside it?" His expression hardened. "You have no idea what you're starting." "I think you started it when you moved the fence. This isn't about 5 acres anymore." "I know." That answer unsettled him. He stepped closer. "Your grandfather was not the man you think he was." I felt something tighten beneath my ribs. "Be careful." "You've built him into some kind of saint." "He wasn't." "And your evidence is what?" "My family remembers him differently. Your grandfather signed the survey. You saw one version. What does that mean?" Wade looked toward the spring house. Then he made a mistake. A small one. But I saw it. He looked at the lower right corner of the foundation. Exactly where my grandfather's note said to search, Wade knew where the document was hidden. Or at least where it had once been. "Rachel filed for an emergency inspection," I said. His eyes returned to mine. "You won't find what you're hoping to find." "Then you shouldn't be worried." "I'm trying to save you embarrassment." "No, you're trying to reach it before I do." For a moment, neither of us moved. The wind pushed dry grass against the wire between us. Then Wade smiled again, but the confidence was gone. "You always were stubborn," he said. "You didn't know me before last year?" "I knew enough." The words landed strangely. Before I could ask what he meant, he turned and walked away. That evening, I searched every box in my grandfather's study. Tax receipts, livestock records, old letters, photographs. Near midnight, I found a ledger from 1974. The same year, Edwin Mercer had tried to change the boundary. Most entries were ordinary: feed purchases, fence repairs, equipment expenses. Then I reached June. My grandfather had written only 3 lines. "Eddie wants the creek line." Told him no. He threatened to expose the spring agreement, moved the original copy beneath the foundation. "Nora must never pay for our mistake." I read the final sentence again. "Our mistake." Until that moment, I had believed the hidden document would prove my grandfather right. Now I understood it might prove something else, something he had spent the rest of his life trying to protect me from. The next morning, Rachel called before 8. The judge granted the inspection. I looked at the ledger lying open on the table. "When?" "Today, 2 o'clock. "And Wade?" "He has been ordered to provide access." I ran my finger across my grandfather's handwriting. What if we find something that damages my claim? Rachel was quiet. Did you discover new information? Maybe. Then bring it with you. At 2, Rachel, Deputy Holloway, Wade, and I stood outside the old spring house. Up close, it looked smaller than I remembered. Ivy covered one wall. The roof sagged slightly in the center. A rusted chain hung from the door. Wade unlocked it. Inside, the air smelled like wet stone and old timber. Light entered through gaps in the boards. Rachel compared the survey to the foundation. The note specifies the southeastern stone. She said, "We found it beneath a broken wooden shelf. The stone was wider than the others and marked with a shallow X. Deputy Holloway photographed it before allowing anyone to touch it. Using a pry bar, Wade's attorney lifted one edge. Beneath the stone was a narrow metal box. Wade stopped breathing, only for a second, but I heard it. The box was sealed with rust. The deputy opened it carefully. Inside were 2 folded documents wrapped in oilcloth. The first was the original easement agreement, signed by both grandfathers. The second was something none of us expected, a handwritten land transfer contract. It stated that Edwin Mercer had agreed to sell my grandfather an additional 11 acres in exchange for paying off a farm debt. The contract had been signed, witnessed, and partially paid, but it had never been recorded. Rachel read the final paragraph twice. "If this agreement is enforceable," she said, "the disputed 5 acres are only part of the issue." Wade's attorney took the paper from her. His face changed as he read. According to the contract, the old spring house, the access road, and 6 more acres of Wade's current farm may have legally belonged to my family for nearly 50 years. Wade had moved his fence to steal 5 acres. Instead, he had led me directly to a document that could cost him 11. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The only sound inside the spring house was water dripping steadily into the shallow stone basin that had supplied both farms for generations. Wade's attorney was the first to break the silence. "This contract has never been recorded." Rachel calmly folded her arms. "That doesn't automatically make it invalid. It was never completed." "You don't know that? I know enough." Rachel smiled politely. "No, you know just enough to be worried." I watched Wade. The confidence that had followed him for weeks was gone. His eyes never left the yellowed contract lying in Deputy Holloway's hands, as if staring hard enough could somehow erase 50 years of history. The deputy carefully photographed every page before placing both documents into evidence bags. "No one touches these again until certified copies are made," he said. Rachel nodded. "That's exactly what I was going to request." Wade suddenly stepped forward. "I want my attorney to examine them immediately." Deputy Holloway shook his head. "You'll receive certified copies with everyone else." "They came from my property," Rachel answered before the deputy could. "They came from evidence hidden beneath a structure connected to an active legal dispute. They were buried on my land." "According to which survey?" Wade clenched his jaw. No answer came, because for the first time since this fight had begun, he didn't have one. The courthouse moved quickly after that. By the following afternoon, Rachel and I sat across from Judge Eleanor Simmons inside her chambers. She preferred agricultural disputes to begin with informal conferences before scheduling full hearings. It saved farmers months of unnecessary expense. The judge adjusted her glasses while reading the newly discovered contract. "Interesting." That single word somehow carried the weight of a dozen questions. Rachel placed the certified survey beside the contract. "The Hart family isn't requesting immediate ownership of the additional acreage." Judge Simmons looked up. "You aren't?" "No." That surprised even me. Rachel had explained her strategy during the drive. "Never ask for everything immediately," she had said. "Ask for what the law clearly supports first." Instead, Rachel pointed toward Wade's survey. "Our immediate request is much simpler." She tapped the page. "We ask the court to invalidate Mr. Mercer's recent survey until the historical records are fully examined." The judge nodded slowly. "Reasonable." Wade's attorney stood. "Your Honor, the newer survey was completed by a licensed professional." Rachel smiled. "So was the one completed in 1968. The newer survey reflects modern technology. The older survey reflects the legally recognized boundary." Judge Simmons raised one hand. "I'll determine which matters more." Outside the courthouse, reporters had already gathered. Apparently, small-town land disputes became surprisingly interesting whenever hidden contracts surfaced. One young reporter approached me. "Ms. Hart," I stopped walking. "Do you believe your neighbor intentionally stole your land?" Rachel gently touched my elbow. "You don't have to answer." But I did. "I believe the truth deserves time." The reporter blinked. "Is that a yes?" "It's the only answer I'm prepared to give." Rachel smiled as we walked away. "Perfect." I didn't actually answer. "You answered exactly enough." Meanwhile, Wade was making mistakes. Lots of them. That evening, Earl Pritchard called me. "I think you ought to come by." His voice sounded uneasy. "What happened?" "Wade's moving equipment." "Where?" "The Eastern Ridge." I grabbed my keys. When I reached the pasture, 2 excavators sat near the old fence line. Several workers were pulling out cedar posts. Not Wade's new fence. Older posts, the ones farther inside his own property. Rachel arrived only minutes later after I called her. She watched quietly for nearly a minute. Then she laughed. "What?" "He's looking." "For what?" "The remaining markers." I understood immediately. The newly discovered contract mentioned 11 acres. If more original markers still existed, they could support every word inside it. Wade wasn't repairing anything. He was desperately trying to find them first, or destroy them. Rachel immediately photographed the machinery. Then she called Deputy Holloway. Again. The deputy arrived visibly irritated. "This is becoming a full-time job." Rachel handed him copies of the preservation order. "They're excavating inside the disputed area." Wade walked over. "We're removing dead cedar." Deputy Holloway looked behind him. The freshly dug trench said otherwise. One worker had already uncovered a square limestone block, half buried, exactly the size of the earlier survey monuments. Rachel pointed. "There." Everyone turned. The worker froze. "So," Rachel said quietly, "would you mind explaining why dead cedar has survey markings carved into it?" The worker looked at Wade. Not the deputy, not Rachel. Wade, Deputy Holloway noticed. "So you knew." Nobody answered. The deputy walked to the stone himself. He brushed away loose dirt with one gloved hand. A deeply carved cross appeared on the surface. Another original monument, still exactly where my grandfather's survey said it would be. Deputy Holloway slowly stood. "No one digs another inch." 3 days later, the county survey office agreed to perform a completely independent survey. Not Wade's surveyor, not mine. A neutral team. Every landowner in Hartwell County trusted David Collins. He had spent 35 years settling property disputes. People joked that David trusted stones more than people. After meeting him, I understood why. He spent nearly 6 hours walking both farms. He measured every surviving monument, compared every historical deed, examined aerial photographs dating back decades. Not once did he ask either of us what we believed, only what the evidence showed. Late that afternoon, he folded his notebook. "I've reached one conclusion." Neither Wade nor I spoke. David looked directly at Judge Simmons, who had joined the final inspection. "The original Hart survey is correct." My shoulders relaxed for the first time in weeks, but David wasn't finished. "The Mercer survey contains one assumption." "What assumption?" the judge asked. "That Beaver Creek has always occupied the same channel." "It hasn't." "No." He pointed toward a line of cottonwood trees. "The creek naturally shifted nearly 30 feet after the flood of 1989. He paused. "The survey ignored geological evidence." Rachel nodded. "Exactly what the county engineer warned about in 1974. David continued. "When the original monuments are used." He unfolded a fresh map. "Mrs. Hart immediately recovers her 5 acres. I smiled until he finished his sentence, and everyone looked back at him. "The unrecorded land contract appears consistent with the physical evidence." Wade suddenly interrupted. "Appears?" David met his eyes. "It will require title research. So it isn't proven?" "No." Wade smiled for the first time all day. Then David calmly added, "But if supporting payment records exist." He tapped the old contract. "Your property line could move almost 300 yards east." Silence. Complete silence. Rachel slowly turned toward me. "Did your grandfather keep financial ledgers?" I thought about the study, the locked drawers, the shelves I had barely touched. Then one memory surfaced. A narrow wooden chest beneath Grandpa's workbench. he had always called it. The books nobody needs until they do. I looked at Rachel. I think he did. She smiled. Then we're not finished. Not even close. Because somewhere inside my grandfather's workshop, there might be proof that my family hadn't merely owned 5 more acres all along. We might have owned 11. And if the payment ledger still existed, everything Wade believed he inherited could change forever. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I wasn't chasing Wade anymore. He was chasing me. Every document we uncovered forced him to react. Every stone marker we found erased another one of his arguments. But Rachel reminded me that evidence wins cases, not feelings. If your grandfather really paid for those 11 acres, she said as we drove back to the farm, there has to be proof. I've searched almost every drawer, then searched the places people forget. That evening, I unlocked my grandfather's workshop. Unlike the farmhouse, nothing inside had changed since the day he died. The scent of machine oil still hung in the air. His old tractor sat exactly where he had parked it after the last hay season. Rusty coffee cans overflowed with bolts sorted by size. Hand tools covered one wall in perfect order. Grandpa believed a person's workbench revealed their character. Everything had its place, including secrets. Rachel helped me search while my friend Ethan Miller photographed every box before we opened it. If this ends up in court, Rachel explained, we need to prove nothing was planted or altered. After nearly 2 hours, nothing. Just receipts, seed invoices, repair manuals, old family photographs. I leaned against the workbench and sighed. Maybe Wade already found it. Rachel shook her head. If he had, he wouldn't still be fighting this hard. I looked underneath the bench. That was when I saw it. A wooden chest covered with decades of dust, exactly where I remembered. Grandpa's handwriting had faded across the lid. The books nobody needs until they do. I almost laughed. Rachel, she knelt beside me. I think this is it. The brass latch resisted before finally giving way. Inside were 6 leather-bound ledgers, each marked with a year. Rachel carefully opened the first. Every page was filled with my grandfather's handwriting. Hay sales, livestock purchases, equipment repairs, feed expenses. Nothing unusual. Until we reached October. One entry had been boxed in red pencil. Paid Edwin Mercer. First installment for East Ridge parcel. Amount $18. Attached beneath the page. Folded into the ledger itself. Was the canceled check. Rachel looked at me. That's not good for Wade. We kept turning pages. Every few months another payment appeared. Each one referenced the same contract. Each one included either a canceled check or a handwritten receipt signed by Edwin Mercer himself. By the end of 1972, every payment had been completed. Rachel counted them twice. The land was fully paid for. So why wasn't it recorded? I don't know. Then we opened the final ledger. Tucked inside the back cover, we found the answer. A letter, addressed to Samuel Hart, from Edwin Mercer. Rachel unfolded it carefully. Dear Sam, the bank won't release my remaining debt unless the property stays under my name until harvest. Give me until spring, and we'll record everything together like we agreed. You've trusted me this far. Trust me a little longer. Your friend, Edwin. I frowned. What happened? Rachel looked at the date. March 1973. She quietly reached for her phone. After a moment, she looked back at me. Edwin Mercer died in a tractor accident 3 weeks later. Neither of us spoke. The room suddenly felt much quieter. My grandfather never had the chance. No. And after Edwin died, the paperwork died with him. Everything finally made sense. Neither family had intended this. 2 friends had made a legal agreement. One unexpected tragedy had left it unfinished. For decades. Everyone assumed the land still belonged to the Mercer family. Until Wade arrived. The following morning, Rachel filed another motion with the court. This time she attached the original contract. Every canceled check, every signed receipt, Edwin Mercer's letter, the independent survey, photographs of every surviving stone marker. By noon. The county clerk called. Judge Simmons had scheduled an emergency hearing. The courtroom was full. Word had spread through Hartwell County. Farmers filled nearly every bench. Most weren't there because they cared about me. They were there because every family in the county depended on accurate property records. If this could happen to me, it could happen to anyone. Judge Simmons entered promptly at 9. This hearing concerns newly discovered evidence relating to Hart versus Mercer. Rachel stood. Your Honor. She presented the ledgers one by one. No dramatic speeches, no emotional performance, only facts, canceled checks, receipts, signatures, dates. The judge examined each document carefully. Then she turned toward Wade's attorney. Have you reviewed these? We have. Do you dispute Mr. Mercer's signatures? No. The payments? No. The authenticity of the receipts? No. The judge looked surprised. What exactly do you dispute? Wade's attorney stood slowly. The contract was never recorded, Rachel answered immediately. Because one party died before recording. Judge Simmons nodded thoughtfully. Continue. Our position, Wade's attorney said, is that ownership never transferred. Rachel placed Edwin's final letter before the judge. Intent matters. The judge silently read every word. Then she looked directly at Wade. Mr. Mercer? Yes, Your Honor. When you ordered your survey, were you aware of these historical documents? Wade hesitated. Just long enough? His attorney closed his eyes. Judge Simmons waited. I knew my grandfather had once discussed selling land. Rachel's eyebrows lifted. You never mentioned that during discovery. I didn't think it mattered. You didn't think a signed purchase agreement mattered? It was incomplete. Rachel stepped closer. So you knew enough to hide it. I didn't hide anything. You moved a fence before notifying Mrs. Hart. I relied on my survey. You relied on the fact that she hadn't found the documents. The courtroom became perfectly still. Judge Simmons looked at Wade for several seconds. Then she asked one final question. Did you ever tell your surveyor about the 1968 agreement? Silence. Mr. Mercer? Finally, no. Rachel slowly sat down. She didn't need another question. The damage had already been done. Court recessed for lunch before the judge issued any ruling. Outside, reporters crowded the courthouse steps. Nobody pushed microphones toward Wade anymore. Every camera turned toward me. One reporter asked, What happens if you win? I looked across the street. Beyond the courthouse stood an old oak tree my grandfather had once pointed out to me. It's never been about winning. The reporter looked confused. My grandfather and Wade's grandfather were friends. I paused. They trusted each other more than paperwork. So what do you want? I want the truth recorded where nobody can erase it again. That afternoon, Rachel received a call from the title examiner. Her expression changed immediately. What is it? I asked. She slowly lowered the phone. They found something. What? The county archive has one more box from the Mercer estate. I felt my heart race. What was inside? Rachel smiled. The missing closing documents. I stared at her. There are more? She nodded. And according to the archivist, she paused just long enough to let the words settle. They aren't signed only by your grandfather and Edwin Mercer. Who else signed them? Rachel looked toward the courthouse doors where Wade stood speaking anxiously with his attorney. The county judge. If the originals matched the copies? The sale hadn't merely been agreed upon. It had been officially approved. The only thing never completed was recording it in the land registry. And that single forgotten filing was about to decide the future of two farms, and the man who had tried to steal 5 acres, only to discover he might never have owned them in the first place. The final hearing began exactly 28 days after I found my grandfather's letter. It felt much longer. Those 4 weeks had changed everything. The 5-acre dispute that started with a fence had become one of the most talked about property cases Hartwell County had seen in decades. Farmers filled every seat inside the courtroom. Some had known my grandfather, others had known Edwin Mercer. Nearly all of them understood one simple truth. If old records could disappear once, they could disappear again. Judge Eleanor Simmons entered promptly at 9 o'clock. This court is prepared to issue its findings. The room fell silent. Rachel leaned toward me. No matter what happens, we brought the truth into the light. I nodded. For the first time, I realized she was right. Whatever happened next, no one would ever be able to pretend my grandfather's work had never existed. The county archivist was called as the final witness. His name was Charles Donovan. He carried a weathered storage box sealed with county evidence tape. Judge Simmons watched as he carefully opened it. Inside were several original documents recovered from an uncatalogued probate file belonging to Edwin Mercer. Charles adjusted his glasses. These records were misfiled after the estate was processed in 1973. Rachel asked the first question. Did you find the missing closing documents? Yes. Were they original? They appear to be. He removed a thick packet. The signatures matched every receipt we had already discovered. Samuel Hart, Edwin Mercer, the county probate judge, 2 witnesses, a licensed surveyor, even the county tax assessor. Rachel handed the packet to Judge Simmons. The judge quietly examined every page. Then she looked toward Wade. Mr. Mercer, yes, Your Honor, your grandfather completed this sale. Wade swallowed. It appears so. More importantly, she tapped the final page. The transfer was legally approved. She looked toward the courtroom. The only step never completed was administrative recording. A quiet murmur spread through the room. Judge Simmons raised her hand. The law recognizes completed conveyances when overwhelming evidence demonstrates the party's intent and performance. She looked directly at Rachel. The payments. Complete. The signatures? Verified. The survey? Confirmed. The boundary monuments? Still in place. The judge nodded once. Then she turned toward Wade's attorney. Do you have evidence contradicting any of those facts? After several seconds. No, Your Honor. Judge Simmons removed her glasses. In that case, she paused. This court rules as follows. My heart pounded so loudly I barely heard the first sentence. The survey commissioned by Mr. Wade Mercer is declared legally invalid. Rachel squeezed my arm beneath the table. The original 1968 survey is reinstated as the controlling boundary. A few people quietly applauded before the bailiff immediately restored order. Judge Simmons continued. The disputed 5 acres shall immediately return to the Hart property. I closed my eyes for just a second, not because I had won, because my grandfather had. But the judge wasn't finished. Regarding the additional 11-acre contract, every person inside the courtroom leaned forward. The court finds overwhelming evidence that the sale was completed in substance, fully paid for, properly witnessed, and approved by the county. She signed the order before continuing. Therefore, she looked directly at Wade. Title shall be corrected to reflect the lawful transfer originally intended in 1973. The courtroom became completely silent. Wade didn't merely lose the 5 acres. He lost the entire 11-acre parcel his grandfather had already sold half a century earlier. Outside the courthouse, reporters rushed toward us. But before anyone could ask a question, someone called my name. Nora. I turned. It was Wade, for the first time since we'd met. He looked tired, not defeated, just exhausted. I'd like a minute. Rachel glanced at me. I'll be over there. She walked away. Wade stood quietly for several seconds before speaking. I owe you an apology. I waited. I believed my survey. No. He lowered his eyes. I believed what benefited me. That was the first completely honest sentence I'd ever heard him say. My grandfather left me stories, he continued. They were incomplete. My grandfather left me records. I know. He looked toward the courthouse steps. I thought your family had taken advantage of mine. And now? He gave a small, almost embarrassed smile. I think they trusted each other more than either of us understood. Neither of us spoke for a while. Finally, he sighed. I should never have moved that fence. No, I can't change that. No, but maybe I can change what happens next. He reached into his truck and handed me a worn wooden box. I found this after the hearing. Inside were old black and white photographs, dozens of them. My grandfather, Edwin Mercer, harvesting tobacco together, repairing fences, fishing in Beaver Creek, standing beside the very spring house that had nearly torn their families apart. At the bottom lay one final photograph. On the back, Edwin Mercer had written, "Land means nothing if neighbors stop being neighbors." I felt my throat tighten. Neither grandfather would have wanted this fight. They had built 2 farms side by side because they trusted one another. Paperwork had failed them. Pride had failed us. 2 months later, the new county survey was officially recorded. Every original monument remained exactly where it had stood for generations. The restored property lines were entered into the digital archive. backed up in 3 separate locations and preserved with every historical document attached. Judge Simmons even recommended that Hartwell County begin reviewing other pre-1980 agricultural records for missing easements and unrecorded agreements. Several neighboring families recovered forgotten access rights because of the investigation. What started as one dispute ended up protecting dozens of farms. That fall, I rebuilt the eastern fence, not where Wade had placed it, not even where the old wire had sagged for years. I rebuilt it exactly where my grandfather and Edwin Mercer had marked it in 1968, using the original stone monuments as my guide. On the day we finished, Wade walked across the pasture carrying a toolbox. I figured one person shouldn't lift all those posts. I looked at him for a moment. "You don't have to." "I know," he smiled. "But good fences deserve honest neighbors." We spent the afternoon working mostly in silence. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. Trust takes longer to rebuild than a fence, but every post we set stood exactly where it belonged. Just like the truth. Sometimes visitors ask why there's an old framed survey hanging above my fireplace instead of a painting. I tell them it's the most valuable thing my grandfather ever gave me. Not because it proved we owned more land. Because it reminded me that the strongest inheritance isn't measured in acres. It's measured in integrity. Land can be stolen. Records can be lost. Fences can be moved overnight. But if someone in your family cared enough to preserve the truth, one day, no matter how deeply it's buried, it has a way of finding its way back into the light.